and welcome back to my channel that I haven't updated in like a month because I guess I'm lazy these days. But you'll be happy to know that I'm back with not just another video, but also another Homestuck video, because everybody loves a Homestuck video. I love a Homestuck video, you guys apparently love a Homestuck video, so welcome back. It's Homestuck time. Also, here's another new place I'm filming in. I moved into this new place a few months ago. Well, actually I moved in August, so September, October, November, December. It's been like almost 6 months that I've been here, and I haven't really filmed that much here, so I'm still trying to figure out like where in the house I'm gonna film. There's not really a convenient place in my bedroom to film, which is where I filmed in my old place. So right now I'm just sitting like in a weird spot in my living room where there's some like plants, and I put this guy here. So maybe I'll keep filming here, maybe I'm gonna film somewhere else. You'll just have to wait and find out. Also, by the way, this is a new camera, and I'm still trying to figure out like how it works and what the best settings are. So if the video quality is kind of bad, or the audio quality is kind of bad, bear with me, I'm figuring it out. Hopefully in the next few videos it'll be a little bit better, because new camera, and it's not like that fancy of a camera, but yeah. Anyways, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is that I'm rereading Homestuck. Yes, it's been many years since I started reading it, and many years since I finished reading it when it ended in 2016. It is now the beginning of 2019, and I am finally rereading Homestuck. I've been meaning to reread Homestuck forever. Like, even before it ended, I wanted to reread it so I would be like caught up a second time when it ended in 2016, but that totally didn't happen. And then after it ended in 2016, I was like, okay, I'm gonna reread it now. I'm gonna reread it now. And I said that for 3 years, but now, beginning of 2019, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm rereading Homestuck. So, Homestuck. Basically my plan is every time I finish reading one act, I'm gonna do a little video and talk about that act and sort of the memories I have of it, and also what it's like to reread it now, years after I first read it. So I just finished Act 1. It took me a couple days. Basically my plan is for like 10 or 15 minutes a day I'm gonna read a little bit of Homestuck, and like if I'm really into it and I have time I'll read more, but like as long as I do like 10 or 15 minutes a day, I should get through it. I mean, it's gonna take a while because it's long and 10 or 15 minutes a day is like not that much, but like I said, just finished Act 1, and that's like 200 something pages, so I'm getting there. So, what did I think about Act 1, having read it for the first time in many years? First of all, it's really funny. I think that's what I remember the most about Act 1, and like, I remember when I first read Homestuck back in the olden days, in like 2011 when I first read it, everyone like said the first couple acts weren't that good, but like I really enjoyed Act 1 when I read it. I was like, man, why does everyone like not like this? And like I can see in retrospect that like the later acts, like Act 5 onward, are like way more like plot heavy and there's more like character stuff, but like the first few acts are really funny, and there like is a decent amount of character stuff with like the kids, like character establishing the characters, developing their relationships. Like Act 1 isn't useless. It's really funny. It's really funny, and I think if you read the first act of Homestuck and you don't think it's funny, then like maybe Homestuck isn't for you, or at least like the sense of humor in Homestuck isn't for you. I don't know. Rereading it again, it's really funny. The other thing I kind of forgot about Act 1 was that you don't just meet John, you also meet Rose in Act 1. For some reason I had it in my head that like the first 4 acts you met the first like one kid per act, even though I think I knew that wasn't true, but like for some reason I was like, yeah, Act 1 you're gonna meet John, Act 2 you're gonna meet Rose, and so on. But you actually meet John and Rose both in Act 1, and I think you meet Dave in Act 3, and then maybe you don't meet Jade. No, you meet Dave in Act 2, and then Jade in Act 3 maybe? Something like that. Anyways, you meet 2 whole kids in Act 1. There's a lot that happens in Act 1. Like, yes, the first little chunk of Act 1 is just John wandering around his house doing nothing like super important. Although honestly, that's my other point about this act. There is so much foreshadowing. Like, so much stuff is established in this act that gets relevant later. And like, I think maybe some of it Andrew Hussie did on purpose, like he knew what was gonna happen and he like set it up in Act 1. But I think on the other hand, like I think a lot of stuff that happens in the early acts was just him like making stuff up as he went along and like making sure to establish lots of random details so that some of those details could come back as plot important. Like I think a lot of people, cause like I think Andrew Hussie has said this and everyone kind of knows that like he didn't have the whole story planned out to begin with. Like he had some ideas I think, but he did not have the whole story planned out. Like he's said that. And so a lot of Homestuck did happen organically and he like made it up as he went along. But like that still requires good storytelling. Like that's not a cop-out, I don't think. Like to be able to do that, like to make a story, like to make it up as you go and to have it still like connect and have cool like references to past events and stuff, not only do you have to like remember things in order to reference past events, but you also have to set up a lot of stuff in the beginning of the story so that some of that stuff can pay off later. And like Andrew Hussie does an amazing job of that in the early acts. Like he gives every character so many specific defining characteristics, he gives every environment so many specific defining characteristics that like of course some of that stuff can come back later. Like Act 1 specifically, like John, he has all these interests. Every single poster on his walls has something about it that can come back later. Every interaction he has with his dad, everything about his dad's personality, every object in his house, like there's so much there. Like everything about his dad and Betty Crocker, obviously that comes back later. I don't think when Andrew Hussie first wrote the first act of Homestuck and he kept talking about how John's dad bakes Betty Crocker stuff all the time, was like, yes, Betty Crocker's gonna be an alien overlord who takes over the earth and like one of the big bads of the series. I don't think he thought that initially, but you wouldn't really know that he didn't think that initially because Betty Crocker already from like Act 1 is set up as this like goofy antagonist for John who hates that his dad bakes so much. And like that goofy antagonist from Act 1 becomes like a real antagonist later on. And there's like so much of that in Act 1 and it's really cool. I don't know. Act 1 is really cool to reread, having read Homestuck and seeing how like every second page has a reference to something that's gonna happen later, whether or not that was intentional when Hussie wrote it. So that's really cool. And yeah, like on that same note, so much happens in Act 1 and yet so little happens in Act 1. Like it's like 250 pages or so, like something around there, and in terms of the scope of Homestuck, which is like 8,000 something pages, that's like not a lot. And like in the scope of the story of Homestuck, like how much stuff happens with like the kids and the trolls and the alpha kids, like what happens to John in Act 1 is like so minimal, but like on the other hand, it sets up a lot. Like Act 1 in 250 pages goes from John sitting in his room playing around with magic tricks to like the apocalypse. Like we actually get the first meteor hitting and John like creating the apple, biting the apple, like all of that happens in Act 1. Like that's a lot to establish in Act 1. Like Act 1 sets up Spurb. Like obviously at the end of Act 1 you don't know everything about Spurb, but it sets up the mechanic for the rest of the game. And in that sense it really is an Act 1. Like if you think about, like I think after a while the acts of Homestuck just sort of became like chapter titles, like especially in Act 6 where it's just wild, like they don't mean much, but especially early on I think each act really does serve as an act, like the same way in like a movie or a play or whatever, when you're like writing it, you set up the acts and each act has like a job to fulfill. I'm a writing student, in case you didn't know. I'm going to university for writing, and one of the things we write is screenplays, and in screenplays you learn a lot about like act structure, and like the generic movie, like the main way of writing a movie has 3 acts, so Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, I'm sure a lot of people know this, and like the end of Act 1, like the break between Act 1 and Act 2 is supposed to be like the catalyst event, or like the changing event that like takes the protagonist from their normal world into like the other world, the world where like the story's gonna happen, right? And sometimes that's not literal, like if it's a romance, that can be like meeting the love interest and going from normal life to pursuing the love interest or whatever. It doesn't have to be an actual other world, but in the case of Homestuck, it literally is another world because it sends John from the normal world to Spurb, and it also sends like the story from the normal world into the other world. So Act 1 really does serve as an act. And like the break between Act 1 and Act 2 is like a movie act break. So I'm actually really curious as I'm rereading it, because I don't really remember where the act breaks were when I read it the first time, to see, especially with the early acts, if they really serve as act breaks the way like a movie or a play would, because that's a really cool thing. And I think Hussie probably was thinking about that, and that's probably why he called it acts, because originally it was supposed to be like the act breaks that would sort of drive the story, and then obviously it took on a life of its own and they started to mean something completely different, and Act 6 is like 17 separate acts in one act. But initially anyways, Act 1 really does serve as Act 1 the way it would in a movie, and I think that's really cool. Yeah, that's basically my thoughts on Act 1. It's funny, there's so much foreshadowing, there's so much that happens in Act 1 even though it's pretty short, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm really excited to read more. So if you have read Homestuck, or you're reading Homestuck for the first time, or you're finally rereading Homestuck, let me know in the comments what you think of Act 1. Do you enjoy it? Are you one of those people who's like, Act 1, not as good as the later acts? Let me know. And if you haven't reread Homestuck and you wanted to reread Homestuck, now would be a great time to start, and we can reread it together. And then when I get to Act 2, you can get to the end of Act 2 and we can chat about it in the comments. That would be really fun. I love Homestuck. So if you enjoyed this video, you can like it, you can subscribe, because I will be posting more of these videos every time I finish an act, and probably when I get to like Act 5 and 6, I'll be posting a video every time I get to the end of like a sub-act, because I'm not gonna do one video for all of Act 6 when Act 6 is so long, so it'll probably be more than 6 videos. But yeah, we'll see. Stay tuned for more. I'm gonna try to read it at a reasonable pace, but I don't know how quickly I'll get through the acts. Obviously the later acts will take longer. We'll see. So thanks for watching, and comment below with your thoughts about Act 1 of Homestuck, and happy reading. I don't know how to end these videos. Bye.